So if there's one thing I emphasize probably to a nauseating amount of detail on this channel, and what I'm trying to do with this channel is how much this character of Batman and Bruce Wayne can really influence and change people's lives if it's a character that means a lot to them. It's wonderful to just have sort of a surface level appreciation for the character, just enjoying the stories, the video games, and the films, as, a majority of the audiences probably do. But there's definitely a big portion as well that really look up to Batman and Bruce Wayne. Bruce Wayne for who he is as a man, maybe how he handles himself in life, business, or maybe not relationships, but you get what I mean. And Batman for his dedication, hard work, will, pure love for his fellow man, and just really breaking down the ability to do the right thing because it is the right thing to do, and being able to do that right thing when maybe it's better, easier to do the wrong thing. My personal story, particularly with Ben Affleck's Batman, now, I've been a Batman fan since I can remember, so this character has always been important to me and always meant a lot to me. But growing up, as we go through life, some things you love a lot can sort of fade, I think is the correct word. It's not that the love's not there, but as life goes on, you get distracted, big things come up in life, you have things going on, and so, things can kind of fall by the wayside. And for me, along with being a nerd, I grew up playing sports. I'd say sports, football, wrestling, and track, particularly football, were my identity growing up. That's how I identified myself. If someone asked what I did or anything from, before elementary till out of high school, I said, yeah, I play football. That's who I was as a person. So much, 90% of my life outside of school and social life was football, training for football practices, or weightlifting. Everything, every habit somehow evolved around training, exercising for sports. And weightlifting and exercise, physicality, strength, and every aspect that goes into the psychological aspect, the mental aspect, and the physical aspect of said training and exercise has always been very important to me. It's been something that I've done as young as I can remember, and I was addicted to it. And, this isn't a video to really go into that per se, but let's just say following out of high school, when football was over, that's what I almost identified myself with. Right out of there, I was, essentially going to school senior year, getting off early around, 11-ish because I had most of my credits done. I was managing, working a gym down the road from my high school called Fat Albert's Gym, right? And I would go there and work out, sign memberships up. Some of my best friends on the planet out of those years were all working out there, so I would find myself being there from, 11:30 in the morning to 7 p.m., 6 p.m. sometimes. And I had no care. I was in no hurry. I was in no sort of rush to get home or worried about the outside world of what was going on. Even if I wasn't just working out in all those hours, I was just having a great time. In that world, in that community, just having fun, enjoying life, and working out. And that became my identity. Now, with that, usually if people work out long enough or exercise, some people can just do it for as long as they want purely for health reasons and personal reasons for themselves, which I think is incredible. But a lot of the times people do sort of maybe contemplate, or that question of competition comes up in their mind. Now, whether that's a bodybuilding show, a physique show, CrossFit, a CrossFit competition, some sort of physicality test, usually creeps up in their mind. Basically a sense of, can they do it? How would they do? Is it possible, or would they be ready? Is what they've been doing up until this point for weeks, months, or years of any has that created any sort of beneficiary that it could actually correlate to competition against other people? And me, I fell into the line outside where I really started to enjoy power training. And what I mean by power training, most people would maybe say strength training because of the ability to hold said weight. When you come to strength training, most people correlate the same, strength and power. But strength is the ability to hold said weight, hold fast, be able to essentially hold it for a period of time. That's the strength aspect. The power aspect is actually physically moving the aspect of a bench press, holding it out of the rack, that's strength. Going down and pressing it, that's the power motion of it. So my interests, where my family had a long history of bodybuilding competitions, I really enjoyed the strength and power training. That essentially became my identity. So as I spoke earlier about, along the lines, the thought of competition sometimes comes into one's mind. Now, in my world, in that style of training, it falls under the line of powerlifting. Powerlifting and strongman, being able to showcase and exert and put that training into effort and some sort of strength and power movements. Powerlifting and strongman is where that falls. For me, it wasn't strongman per se, but powerlifting was something that I definitely had my eye on and was interested in. And I think outside of if you play sports for so long, the itch to compete stays with you. Even if it's not even the itch for success, just the itch for that rush of competition, a little bit of fear and anxiety, prepping for said competition, and having something to identify yourself with that's sort of bigger than yourself, is something that athletes and people who have kind of experienced in that world tend to have, and I'm not sure it really ever goes away. But they do find sort of fixes to help with that. And in my world, it was the contemplation of doing a powerlifting meet. I had so many people in that industry really, and I was so fortunate enough that they were so awesome, so positive, and really encouraging to basically enforce, I think you should do it. I think you should try it out, and see where that success would lead you. And in my head, to be honest, not to try to sound super overconfident or anything, but I think judging my strength numbers and how that was going, in my senior year football article for the state, it was mentioned that I was the strongest kid in the program. I had all the records my senior year weightlifting. To say I was somewhat aware of, there is some, you have had some success in this field, and maybe there is some potential there, wasn't out of my mind. But I was also really fortunate enough that these people who were encouraging me, who had experienced this realm of the exercise and training lifestyle in both bodybuilding and powerlifting, were also very humbling. They weren't out there to tell me, yes, you should go and see if you can win. They were more or less, you should go and essentially prove to yourself, see where you're at, and do it for the betterment and sort of experience that your body and mind might be needing and craving at the moment, because it's out of the competition world in sports. And I was so lucky to have that encouragement. But really, with a lot of things with life, we contemplate things for so long, and we worry and we stress, and the act of actually committing to something really sometimes is the hardest part of it all. Even, harder than the actual physically doing the competition itself. It's getting that encouragement, that fire up our ass, or, whatever you want to call it, to actually, sign those papers, put that name on that, call sheet or anything, to really be like, hey, you know what, this is it. You've committed, your name's on that piece of paper. It's time to, grab a hold of that steering wheel and really, force yourself into, it's your decision to make of how this is going to go. And out of all that encouragement I have, it was crazy that it was so hard for me, but I just could not commit myself to going after that for some reason. I don't know what it was. Maybe it was fear, maybe it was anxiety, maybe the stress of me not knowing how I would do. But so I waited, and I spent, a little bit longer than maybe I wish I had. Well, I don't know. Actually, no, I can't say that, because what brought me to actually do it, I think, was so much of a buildup of that contemplation that I think it happened at the right time for the right reasons. But it wasn't anything sort of from anyone in the real world. So come March of 2016, a film called Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice releases in theaters, and we are introduced to a new Batman, a second film for a Henry Cavill Superman, and my sort of fan obsession or love for that character is there. It's growing more. It's coming back from, sort of that hiatus I was on. But I had such an interesting time with that film. See, the first time I saw it, the theater power went out right as they were about to fight. Right after Ben Affleck said "Men are brave" and stopped Superman's punch, power went out. And I was locked in, man. I was enjoying it. I was so interested in the story, the sort of character process of this Batman and Bruce Wayne and Superman, and I was crushed. And it wasn't a happy ending of them being able to fix it. We all had to exit the theater, got refunded, and had to go on our way. And I went again. And you're not going to believe this, the power went out again. Twice. So my luck seeing this film wasn't great, and I was struggling to see a film I really wanted to and was really enjoying. But maybe this is also leading up to this story or what I'm talking about. So eventually, the time I finally got to see this film in all of its full glory, in, no interruptions, and really how it should be seen, is when it came out on physical release. And I picked up the extended version, that has 30 minutes extra of footage that really dives into the character development, the motives of Lex Luthor, and some additional scenes that really add to, I think everyone can agree, is such a shame that it got cut from the theatrical release. But in watching that film and being in that sort of days of commitment and wanting to compete or do something in my kind of heart I felt like I would do good in, I'm watching the film, and I've tried to tell this before, and sometimes I have a hard time always putting it into words, or at least explaining the impact it had in words. I think it's something that potentially, it's one of those things that no matter how much you try to explain it, the act of physically being there and experiencing it, some of it you just can't do it justice. But in the world of being somewhat uncommitted and nervous, anxious, and sort of afraid of doing so, you look at this introduction to this Bruce Wayne, this Ben Affleck Bruce Wayne, and you're introduced to him in a state where he's essentially becoming, he's learning or experiencing this factor where he has trained so hard in his life, and for 20 years he thought he was the pinnacle and best, in the best situation he can to protect his fellow man and to fight as hard as he can, and he's trained as hard as he can, and for 20 years it's worked. But then in the blink of an eye, a flip of a switch, he's introduced to a man who can fly, stop bullets, shoot lasers out of his eyes. He's flying through buildings, right? He's introduced to gods in real life. And this is essentially sent Bruce Wayne into some sort of an anxious, fearful, and nervous spiral about his own abilities as a man, what he's done with his life leading up to this moment, and what he's going to do forward. And much of the story going forward from Bruce Wayne after that moment is reacting out of fear. And reacting, he's afraid of this God, even though he wouldn't admit it, and what it can do or what it could potentially do, where he himself is taking upon it as his responsibility to stop this God, no matter what it takes. And throughout that journey, you see him suffer, you see him fail, you see him being wrong. But part of the beauty in me watching that film was seeing a man so determined in what he wants to do that he will not let a single ounce of fear, doubt, criticism, outside noise, or anything stop this man from accomplishing what he wants to do. Right? One of the beautiful things about this Batman is that he is faced with a god. He's introduced to a god. Like I said, a flip of a switch. A man who could fly through that Batcave, crush him at any instance. He has no sort of physical and mental way to understand this human right now. But in that, he does not quit. He does not stay scared. He trains as hard as he possibly can throughout that film to basically refuse to take fear and no as an answer, right? We see him training. We see him using his mind, wits, body, and will to forge himself into basically someone who can stand up against a god, right? Because that's what he's pitted up against. And again, still, as I'm saying this, trying to think of the actual words of how to explain it. It's kind of hard, but I guess what it breaks down to is that seeing a man who is faced with the absolute impossible, right? Or what someone would say is the impossible, with fighting a god, knowing that there's a 99% chance that he could fail, there being a 99% chance that he doesn't know what he's getting himself into, that there's a 99% chance he very well could die doing this. That man does not for 1 second doubt himself or be scared or stop what he's doing or allow that fear that Batman has fought for so long to stop him from this mission, right? He is so determined, as we like to say with Batman. That man's greatest power, he has superpowers, it's his willpower, right? He doesn't care what he's faced up against. He doesn't matter what the odds. He knows what's right. And as Superman will say in the animated series, that man will fight till his last breath for what is right. And that's what I saw in this story. This man took every sort of piece of hate, fear, doubt, every sort of instance of regret and negativity in his life in this moment, and he basically put his foot down and said no. So in those times, we see him training, we see him fighting, we see him finding every aspect, every detail he can about this person, because he believes in his heart it's the right thing to do to stop him, right? And when that moment comes, right, when it's time, he thinks upon his legacy and what he's done with his life as he's sitting in a burned down manor that has been passed down from Wayne generation to Wayne generation. And he's essentially thinking about what his legacy is and what he's done. And wondering if in his age at, 20 years of doing what he's done, has it all been worth it? or has it all been a waste? Or when he's gone, if what he's doing fails, what has he left this world, and in what state has he left it? Is it better or is it worse? In his mind right now, it's worse, and he needs to make it better. And he proclaims that this crucible he's brought upon in this moment to fight and protect what he believes is right in his heart will be his legacy. He thinks what he's doing is for the betterment of the world, and he needs to see it through to the end, even if it kills him. So, in his final moments walking out of Wayne Manor, he tells Alfred that this is his legacy. What he's done, criminals, crime, are like weeds. You pull one out, another one grows in its place. But what he's doing in his life now is about the future of the world. It may be the only thing he does that matters, and it's his legacy. So you see a man who is older thinking about what he's done with his life. And it gets you thinking, me thinking at the time as an 18-year-old about legacies, about the future, about what you want to see going forward in your life. Because at 18, you've just graduated high school. You're out. You're experiencing sort of a lot of that first free will as a man and being able to pick and choose what your destiny is and what your legacy is going to be in life. And as someone fresh out of there, it was a beautiful insight, and to get in that mindset of, you're in the priming foundational spot to really put yourself on a path. You can follow a path, but you need to leave a trail. You need to find out for yourself in your own world what you're made of. And so in doing that and seeing a man so dedicated to that, and at the very end, I think the quote he gives from Frank Miller in The Dark Knight Returns really sums up a lot of that mentality, where he says, "My parents taught me a different lesson, dying in the gutter for no reason at all. They taught me the world only makes sense if you force it to." Now, doesn't that solve so many problems for everyone? Doesn't that mentality or that mindset really cure and break down a lot of ways the issues we face as humans in our lives, mentally, psychologically, and physically, if we were to go about it that attitude? It only changes if you force it to. What you're worried about only makes sense if you force it to. It means take action. Don't sit. Grab the steering wheel and take action. If you're worried about it, make it make sense. If you're stressed about it, make it make sense. If you're nervous, make it make sense. Quit sitting there. Quit not doing anything. Force it. Force it to make sense. Don't allow your life to be driven by fate. Make it make sense. So I was thinking about competing in powerlifting. Am I going to sit and let that fear take over? Am I going to sit and let that nervousness, doubt, or honestly somewhat laziness to take over? Or am I going to force it to make sense? Am I going to force myself to see what I got? To force myself to believe in myself a little bit, and force myself to not be a prisoner to fate and make my legacy. That very night after watching that movie, that night actually when that movie ended, I signed up for that powerlifting meet. And right then and there becomes the commitment and fear of like, hey man, you're in it now. It's time for you to really show what you're made of. Don't let it be left to chance, right? It's all up to you. So in normal circumstances, a lot of people, which I have no issue with, but they tend to look for a lot of outside source and information to sort of prepare for these meets. They might hire a coach. They might obsess over the science or the technicalities or the outside noise they might hear about what they can and can't do, or what they should do. But me, I chose a very risky path, but maybe really the best path of not hiring a coach, not looking for outside information or what I should and shouldn't do, but trusting myself. I knew I didn't go about where, I wanted an outside help or outside noise to try to tell me how to follow this path for myself. No, I felt like this commitment and me forcing it to make sense was all up to me. So I didn't hire a coach. I essentially hunkered down, and for the next 4 or 5 months, I'd get done with school, go to the gym, lock in, and I essentially felt like I became Bruce Wayne in those training scenes training. I created my own program, my own training routine, my own recovery routine, all built around the mindset, dedication, and heart that he showed in that film for basically forcing it that, it doesn't matter what you want, what you need, or what you're afraid of in your life. You can force it to make sense. You can force it to be happen. You want to break these records, you want to win this competition, you can. Just don't be afraid of it. You can. And I took that mindset throughout all those months and preparations. And to kind of summarize the end of this, dropping into my first meet where you often come in with coaches, a load of support, or the over analyzing preparedness of equipment, supplementation, and sort of every science-based factor you can. I came in there with shoes, a belt, and my attitude. First powerlifting competition, I took first. And I broke every state record for my weight class in that age group in one meet. And quite frankly, it's pretty unheard of to happen. And outside of that, and I didn't make it a secret that I, was using Batman in some way to emulate or force myself into that mindset that I can do this, and it worked. And, even beforehand, I had a plethora of scenes I would watch before I was about to lift of Batman and Ben Affleck's Bruce Wayne, and things that would kind of get me in that mindset to believe in myself more beforehand. And I carried that attitude through 4 other powerlifting meets. And, I am proud of myself enough to say that I placed first in every single one of those meets. I ended up beating every state record in my age group, in my weight class. And I was the only 19-year-old kid at the time to be invited to a World Invitational powerlifting meet. That, at the time, World Invitational, you kind of have to go in with the expectation where, because there's not a ton of age gaps in those. So I'm 19 competing with 40-year-olds, 19 competing with 50-year-olds, 19 competing with 30-year-olds. But just being invited to go there at a world event where people all around the world are being invited from their qualifications to this event, and being the only 19-year-old kid invited that qualified for this event is one of the proudest moments of my life. And, I'm trying to summarize this again, how I've said this is kind of hard to put into words, but all that success, hard work, and everything I learned about myself in that year turnaround of quick success, where I had people at the highest level telling me I had a phenomenal future in this event, and I really could take this to the highest level if I wanted to. And, coming up with these challenges where to beat state records, I had to pull a weight I had never done before until that meet. And it was 20, 30 pounds heavier than I had ever done. And relying solely on that attitude of forcing it to make sense and watching clips of Batman before the lift and breaking those records and having that success is just sort of an insight to what I think is so important about this character and why I think this character is so important to so many people is that you can find personal stories if this is a character that means a lot to you, and you can find ways to use it and relate it to your life. The biggest or smallest sort of crucible, maybe it's something you're fighting for, maybe it's a hardship you're dealing with, maybe it's something that you've been fighting not or wanting to do but sort of afraid to do so. You can't. And just think about it. If you need that help, think about how Batman would do it. Think about how Bruce Wayne would do it. Would he be nervous? No. Would he be afraid? Maybe. The Batman, I think, is always actually afraid in some way. He just doesn't let it control him. Could Batman be scared? Yeah, he doesn't let it control him. Is Batman always put up against the biggest odds? Yeah, but he doesn't let it control him. He forces it to make sense in his world. He works so hard for it to make sense. Sort of a 32-minute story that I hope, had some sort of interesting aspect to it. Maybe some important, maybe I'd love to hear other people share these kind of stories. Again, I have a hard time really explaining every detail and exactly how much I really committed to this mindset, because it's hard to summarize just sitting here in front of a camera, and not making it go completely all over the place and, not be a total disaster. But please, everyone, if they see this, please share. If you have similar stories of how you've used this character in your own life, please share. I'd love to. This has been Hayden Barton for the Batman Tradition. Take care.